To the Board of Behavioral Sciences. It is Friday, March 3rd, 2017, and it is approximately 8:35 a.m. Could we please, meeting is called to order and establish a quorum, please?
Good morning. Dr. Peter Chu,
Here.
Tamara Ashley,
Here.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach,
Here.
Deborah Brown,
Here.
Betty Conley,
Here.
Christina Wong,
Here.
Dr. Leah Brew,
Here.
Aaron Pines, Max Disposti,
Here.
and for the record, the following members are absent: Sarita Coley, Renee Launer, Patricia Lock-Dawson. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go with introductions. I'll start with you, Dr. Chu.
Peter Chu, public member.
Good morning, Samara Ashley, public member. Hi, Christine Whitlisbach, public member.
Deborah Brown, public member.
Betty Conley, LEP member.
Christina Wong, LCSW member.
Leah Brew, LPCC member.
AMF TRB member.
Max Disposti, public member.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar, it doesn't look like we have item A, but we do have item B, and that should be in front of you on the dais. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, the motion by Dr. Chu. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Christina Wong seconded. Christina?
Okay. Dr. Peter Chu,
Aye.
Tamara Ashley,
Aye.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach,
Well, I'm going to have to not vote because we just got these and I haven't had a chance to read them.
so that'll be an abstain.
Abstain.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah
Aye.
Brown, Betty Conley,
Yes.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew,
Yes.
Aaron Pines, Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Moving on to the chair report. On item A, the changes or revision in the P&A committee is that it is now going to a 3-member committee. Scott Bowling has resigned from the board, which made it a 4-member committee. So do we need a vote on that?
No.
No? Okay. So that's an update on the P&A committee. So it is now a 3-member committee. Board member activities. I'll start with myself, Max, and Ms. Mattson went to a trans youth education symposium in San Diego to look at and become educated on trans youth therapy and how to handle the trans youth population in a very sensitive and human way. And so, Max, do you have anything you would like to add, since you were a very integral part of putting on that symposium?
Perhaps just the fact that it's one of a kind event. This is an annual symposium where some providers are able to get CEUs as well. It's done often in Southern California and Northern California, twice a year, and it's definitely one of the references for a lot of providers to provide healthcare and mental health for transgender youth in particular. So we hope to see more of that. So thank you
Yes.
for coming down too.
Thank you. It was a great symposium. Learned a lot. In fact, we're going to follow up with that. There will be a presentation by Dr. Olson Kennedy at our May meeting. So for those of you that did not attend, you will be able to have an opportunity to ask questions and get an overview of what we saw for 2 days.
Correct.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to start with any member that might want to share anything that they have done, any conference, speaking engagement, or anything like that. I'll start with Karen Pines. Would you like to report anything you've done? Okay. No, Leah?
So Kim and I went to the ASWB meeting, November 17 to 19. I actually represented the board to welcome the ASWB members to California.
Oh,
It was really fun. So it was the delegate assembly meeting. So it went really, really well. I think, Kim, you can talk a little bit about, your nomination, right?
Yeah, following that, Renee Launer also attended that event.
Yes.
And following that annual delegate meeting, I was subsequently contacted and asked to serve on the Mobility Task Force for ASWB. So we'll be working on that. The goal of that particular task force is to improve portability across the states and come out with some type of model to present to state boards for consideration. So I look forward to bringing that to the board later.
Yeah, so additionally, they also selected the slate of their board of directors. So that's really what the delegate assembly is about, too.
Additionally, during the delegate assembly, they have a closed session where they do talk about their examination. The ASWB is the national exam that we use for licensure here in California. So we get to hear how the exam is developed and evaluated on an ongoing basis, and some of the statistics surrounding that. And I'm pleased to share with you that the way that their exam is developed and created mirrors what we do here in California. And in our upcoming newsletter, which will be published in May, I've contacted one of the item writers that works on the ASWB exam, who is in California, and she will be providing just a brief article about her experience in serving on a national level and creating an exam used for licensure across the country.
Congratulations on your appointment.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we have recognition, and
Some are here, I don't see. Matt, Steve's here, but Mr. Mason is not. Or we can start with Steve. You can start with Steve.
all right, this portion, we are going to recognize some of the staff members and their years of service. So if Samara, if you would help me.
Oh, they're trickling in.
I'm going to say their name, yeah. Okay, we'll start with Steve Sodergren, and he is celebrating 5 years of service. Congratulations. And secondly, we have Mark Mason.
He's not here just yet. He's probably handling, yay, Mark.
Yay. You just hold on to it, and then you can let us know when he
Right.
arrives.
Right.
He also, too, has served 5 years.
And both Steve and Mark have been an integral part of the management team, and with their leadership, they've helped guide us through the transition to the Breeze database system and examination restructure. So, and both of them were deeply involved in the customer survey that you'll see later today.
Okay, moving on, we have the executive officer's report. Kim?
Okay, here we go. So first, our staff is trickling in, and I just want to recognize them for the reason we're able to give these reports and provide good news about our operations is through their efforts. They make us look really good, and I want to tell them thank you. The last year in particular has been kind of interesting and bumpy with the exam restructure, but we've weathered it well. We're still here, and they're still continuing to do the good work that I'm happy to present to you today. Yeah, if you guys
them?
would stand up, because
So we can acknowledge you,
Yeah,
please?
yeah.
We really appreciate it. It's nice to put faces with all of the work.
Yes. I get to share their work, but they do it, and I'm grateful to work with such high-quality individuals. So as we move into the budget, 2016-17 budget, we took a bit, we have a little rise. We have just a little over a $12 million budget this year. In part, the rise is due to the increased spending authority that we received through the governor's budget last year. And that is primarily due to the law and ethics exam restructure. Essentially, we had to submit a request to spend the money that we were receiving for all those lovely law and ethics applications. The California and state budgets work rather uniquely, very different than what your own personal budget works. If you see you're collecting more money in your own personal budget, you're like, oh, great, I got more money, I can spend it. But in a government budget, you can't spend more than what you're authorized for. So, for example, if I'm authorized to spend $1 million, but I'm collecting $2 million, I can only spend $1 million. So that's why you see the increase in our budget. No, adverse effect to our budget, just now we can spend the money we're collecting, which is good news for those exam candidates. So we're about halfway through the fiscal year. As of December 31st, we have spent about 44% of our budget. And the breakdown per category is laid out for you in our report. It's pretty consistent with the report that I've presented in previous years. We have roughly about 18% in personnel cost, operational equipment and expenses. So this is our pro rata. This is what we pay for DCA legal, DCA HR services, et cetera. Our rent, that's about 19%. So far, we've spent 6% of our budget in enforcement costs, just about $780,000 so far. So we're keeping pace and at a rate that's comfortable for us overall with our budget hitting the halfway mark. As of December 31st, we'd collected nearly $5.6 million in revenue. And the chart also attached shows the revenue collection in comparison to previous years. This year is a very dark blue, and you can compare. You see that we sort of spike in certain months, and our spikes remain reasonably consistent. The fund report, or fund condition report, is also included in your packet, and as of the date of this report, we're reflecting a 4.2 month in reserve. So this is our rainy day fund. This is what sits out there in case of an emergency. Statutorily, we can't carry any more than 24 months. This is also the fund that if things get dicey with the general fund that is open to a loan to help bridge the gap in the general fund. And speaking of general fund loans, we also are reporting $6.3 million in loan repayment in budget year 17-18. And in doing that, if that comes to fruition, then we would have a 7.8 month in reserve. So are there any questions about the dollars and cents?
Questions from board members? Okay, seeing none.
Okay, the operation report, which is actually the work of staff. I couldn't do all of this by myself, and I'm grateful for them again. Overall, this is a second quarter report, and not surprisingly, our volumes in applications did decrease. I'm going to point out a erroneous number on MFT interns in the second quarter. In your packet, it states 1,213 applications. That's incorrect. It's actually 693 applications, because we now have the ability to tease out how many applications are specific to law and ethics and how many are just overall applications. And so law and ethics examination numbers will be reported under the examination category. So overall, you can see that things really dropped in terms of application volumes, but that's consistent with what we see. We're now moving past the graduation season, and so that's expected and allows us to catch up just a tad bit. Licensing and application processing timelines, the next page, you'll see that, that they've gone up, and that's not unexpected because reflective of the volume of applications we receive in the first quarter and trying to get those done. But still, overall, we are processing in the second quarter applications under 30 days, which is fine. Recently, we just had another report. We get reports weekly. That number's risen a little bit, but by and large, we're getting most applications are still processed in 30 days. There are some application categories that are hitting the 45-day, but still under 60-day mark. Primarily, that's due to some vacancies in the unit, and those vacancies have been filled, so we'll see those numbers come back down. We issued over 1,700 initial licenses, and as of January 1st this year, we have nearly 107,000 licensees and registrants. So business is really good there. For our examination program, there's lots to report here. There's been some significant changes. Last quarter, we administered 8,216 exams. 5,956 of those were law and ethics exams. So that's very robust. Last quarter, we did 8,807 applications. So we're remaining pretty consistent with very little fluctuation in those numbers. We did conduct 9 examination development workshops from October to December. And the big news is that through restructuring and looking at our resources, we reclassified a vacant position and added the position of manager to the examination unit. And we were happy to welcome back Gina Bayless. She had previously worked with us as an enforcement manager and has returned to us to work as our examination unit manager. And under her direction, she immediately began doing some process improvements within the unit. Some of those include the addition of Gina to directly oversee and be dedicated to just the work of the examination unit. We have added a analyst who is dedicated to oversee and coordinate examination workshops, arrange and coordinate the subject matter expert recruitment for the workshops and their contracts, their travel arrangements, and their processing of all their invoices. And we're currently recruiting for another evaluator in the examination unit. This individual will be cross-trained, primarily respond to a lot of the email inquiries we get, phone inquiries, as well as help process some of that workload that's in that examination unit to keep those applications moving through the process. The focus of this particular unit is definitely to improve the processes and our service to our public. They focused on improving the coordination of the workshops, recruiting subject matter experts, and to provide quicker and timely processing of all the invoices for our subject matter experts who participate in these workshops. And I'm happy to report to you today that every invoice that we have received that has been complete, no matter when the workshop occurred, has been submitted to accounting. And that was as of Tuesday of this week. So we have no outstanding invoices unless the subject matter experts have not given them to us. So all the issues that were associated with some of the delays in processing and getting the subject matter experts their reimbursement, those have been resolved. If there's in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, someone that hasn't gotten their reimbursement from months ago, then I would encourage them to contact our office and we can research as to what's going on. So we also want to improve the customer service between the subject matter experts, our board, and the Office of Professional Examination Services. So that's going on. Additionally, the exam unit staff is going to attend the opening of the workshops, each new workshop on a routine basis, just to put faces with the names and start connecting with those individuals in the workshops. In March, actually, this month, we're now in March, we're going to start subject matter recruitment to expand the pool of experts we have. I mean, we really need experts that are licensed professional clinical counselors, California licensed, California-based, and educational psychologists, LEPs. And so the recruitment information will be on our website shortly if it is not already there. And I know that Gina in particular has reaching out to all our associations to spread the word that we really want to get a more diverse pool and expand our pool of subject matter experts. Again, we talked about coordinating, better coordination about our exam workshops and working with the subject matter experts, OPES, and improving our communication. We are also in the process of obtaining bids for a hotel contract. This was kind of a challenge for us this last year. The rates for reimbursement on a hotel locally, Sacramento, have not, the state rate has not really increased. Currently, it's still at $95. And with the new arena and some of the growth that's happening within Sacramento, getting a rate at $95, while possible, is not really in an area that I think any of us present would want to stay in. And, they tend to be further out away from the workshop site. So we want to find a contract that, perhaps maybe won't, getting a $95 rate is unrealistic, but a rate that's reasonable and still is in close proximity to the workshop site and doesn't add a lot of increased travel costs back and forth to the workshop. So we're working on that, and we hope to have that in place by July 1 at the start of the fiscal year. Previously, we had always had a hotel contract for subject matter experts, and we are one of the few boards that actually does that. Other boards just sort of leave them on their own, and so it's a nice service that we can provide to our subject matter experts. But since we were unable to do so this year, it's really caused sort of challenges in terms of reimbursing the subject matter experts. They're out of pocket a little bit more money. And I heard their concerns and we agree with them. And so we're working to get that resolved so we can resume what was perceived as normal operations there. Looking ahead, Gina and her staff are going to continue to look at everything that occurs in that examination unit to identify any additional areas for improvement. We're going to be adding additional resources, providing cross-training in that unit, and we want to reduce the application processing times, and we want to improve our response to candidates who are in the exam cycle and have questions. And we hope that that's when we do all of that, the end result is then we can start proactively working what we call exception reports. These are reports that are provided to us that identify candidates who didn't get into the examination cycle but should have, and primarily that's due to some missing transactions that might be in the Breeze data system that we need to fix. Right now, we're doing it reactively, and none of us like that. We want to be a little more proactive. So this will give us the opportunity to actively work that. So that's kind of the big news in the examination program. Our administration program, this is our cashiering unit, this is ledge, this is personnel, this is our front counter, our phone staff, mail. And what they've done in the last quarter, it's nearly 9,800 applications in the quarter. And while that seems to be a lot, it is a 22% decrease. And again, this is because we're not getting the after graduation applications. So that's sort of a normal cycle for us. None of the 9,800 applications I just mentioned include renewals. We renewed 12,930 licenses and registrations in the last quarter, and our online renewal activity continues to be robust. I'm pretty excited that continues to grow, so we continue to encourage people to renew online. The work in the enforcement program still remains steady. We received 291 consumer complaints and 271 notifications that a licensee had been arrested. We closed 567 cases in the last quarter and sent 49 cases to the Attorney General's office for formal discipline. 20 accusations were filed and 5 statement of issues were filed as well, and we had 24 final citations. And again, the number to complete the formal discipline process, this is performance measure 4, our average was 868 days. And, again, that caveat is, well, we can do everything that we can to improve our internal processes, monitoring. Our achievement of this goal remains based on other agencies' workload and their staffing. So we have no direct control over the staffing and resources and processing at the Attorney General's office, nor do we have that control at the Office of Administrative Hearings. So, I mean, we'll continue to look at our internal processes and see where we can make improvements. At this point, we have 2 dedicated staff members to routinely and actively monitor every case that goes over to the Attorney General's office for referral. We routinely follow up with them. We send over our statement, our settlement terms in those cases where a settlement is appropriate. But there's still the due process rights that the licensee and the registrant have. And so within that realm, you're looking at requests for continuances, the negotiating back and forth. It can add that time. And again, that's not anything that we have control over. And it's important that we adhere to the Administrative Procedures Act so that not only do we protect the interests of Californians, but, the licensees, because that's considered a property right, the license, we have to afford them their due process rights. So that just inherently takes time. And Leah has a question.
Out of curiosity, have you tracked the, percentage of cases that the complaints and convictions relative to the number of licensees? Like in the 4 years I've been here, the number of licensees has accelerated. And while I have felt that we've had an increase in the cases that we review, it doesn't seem proportional, which I was just wondering if the percentage is getting smaller.
I think the percentage, it's something I haven't looked at in a while, but at one point I did look at the receipt of new applications for registration versus those that had prior criminal convictions. And at about that time, it was about a 7-8% ratio. I think it stays relatively the same. Everything moves up, so your population moves up, but your percentage stays relatively the same. But because you've got a bigger population, the number is bigger.
Right. No,
So,
well, I was thinking less about the criminal convictions maybe and more consumer complaints.
Something we can look at. I mean, we can run some numbers on that and see what the ratio is. I think that would be an interesting number to look at.
As an educator, it's interesting to me because I think that, if we can improve education, and now that the BBS is able to go out to the different venues and with the different groups, organizations, and talk about what goes wrong most often, that I think that we could reduce. I don't know that we'll ever reduce the DUIs, for example, but I do think we could reduce the don't advertise beyond your scope and don't do forensic work when you're not qualified. And yeah,
and I did recall, I think I did an article maybe a year and a half ago in one of the newsletters. We talked, the focus of the article was what a licensee or registrant, what happens if a complaint is filed against you. And if I recall correctly, there were some numbers in there about, the number of complaints versus the number of real actions that occur. So I think that was a spring article, but I can pull that up. But I think moving forward, it would be interesting to look at those numbers.
thank you. Peter has a question?
Yes, I know we've been trying to improve our internal process to reduce the number of days to complete the enforcement. Do you have any statistics? Like we've been saying that, like in the past 3 years, like we improve it by 3 days, 5 days, that kind of thing.
Well, overall, if you pull up your the quarterly stats, if you look at the enforcement, it would be page 25. In the last section, it says all investigations, and you'll see the average day to close when we look at everything that's been closed. So year-to-date, we assigned 1,102 cases, and we have closed 1,117 cases, and our average day to close is 140 days. So essentially, staff is getting their work done, under the 6-month timeline that we have asked them to do if the matter, in any case. And then if we do our work in 6 months, then the clock starts ticking over at the AG's office. So, I mean, overall, I think staff is doing what they need to be doing and meeting their performance standards. But when we send it out, if you look at, where is that? Oh, we had it. If you go to the next page and you look at disciplinary orders, and the final, everything that's final, that's where you start seeing the numbers really jump. So for this quarter, it's, overall in this year, we're at 826 days to close. And this is performance measure 4. And the time starts from the day the board receives the complaint until the order is final. And whenever we issue a final order, it does not become effective until 30 days after the order is signed. So there's, okay, now you have that automatic time built in. So it's a question that comes up frequently, not only for us, but with the legislature. And I know that the Attorney General's office has recently added more staff. There was, so there's going to, and they have added a new tracking mechanism, a new database to track their timelines, and that became effective this fiscal year. So it will be interesting to see if we can make any inroads in those numbers.
But how is those kind of numbers compared to the previous year,
The previous years, for our staff, our numbers have been fairly consistent. We are definitely under the 6-month mark, and it's been that way for several years. Overall, the disciplinary orders, when we look at this last number, they go up and down and up and down, and that's been consistent.
Yeah, but my thing is, if we keep saying that we're improving our process, and but we're just saying, but in the past few years, our numbers about the same, then whether we can make that statement.
Right. So would it be helpful if we teased out on these disciplinary cases exactly how much time it's taking our staff and report that separately? Yeah, okay. We can do that.
Yes, Christina?
So I have a question not relating to the enforcement, but the examination program. So do you want me to ask it now? Okay. So I'm glad that, the resources has been invested in developing the examination. And I remember that, I asked, several times to publish the passing rate so we can, use it as a reference, to kind of monitoring, how the new examination program looks like, and I think that information is very, essential, for the examination program, to really monitoring, what, how the people are responding to the examination. And I think way back when, there's also information about the schools, the breakdown of the schools. And it would also be pretty beneficial, for the faculty to know, if their passing rate is good, bad, to make some, adjustment. So, I hate to just keep pushing it.
No.
But I would really love to see, that be included in part of the board reports.
Okay. Do you want to respond?
And I apologize for not getting, I think the last time I promised that they'd be up there on the website and stuff. And we had actually worked on and pulled the reports, but pulled them differently. So we are working on getting those on the website, and then they will also be on, I guess, put in the reports and stuff. So we'll pull those on the test cycles. So for some of them, then every 90 days we'll pull them and publish them. So we're looking at a different way of publishing it on the website too to make it easier. So
I think there is I subscribe to the e-letters. So, I know there's, the score, but the score doesn't mean anything, because it doesn't mean anything, but it's really about, how many percent of the people pass.
And that's what we'll be posting. It will be the pass rates for the first time test takers and the
Yes,
second time test,
right.
just kind of like what we have
Before.
the old stuff that we have up there now, and then also the school lists, and so from there too.
Thank you very much.
I would add that is it percentage correct that people have to get for the pass rate is helpful. You know how like sometimes it ranges around 70% correct is sort of where the pass rate is, or 75%?
Okay.
It helps ease their tension to know if they need to get 100% correct on that
It's-
test.
That does ease their tension. It increases our workload, though. But we will.
If it's
but
too
we
hard,
start-
then I
no,
get
it's
it.
not hard.
Yeah.
We have
Okay.
started doing that to be more transparent during the transition period, and I think it's kind of become a standard now. So I guess we will.
I
And
mean,
maybe
I'm just thinking, it's a computer.
Yeah.
Can't the computer do that? like, why would it involve human hands? It should just pop up. Yeah, it should just be a button.
Oh, you mean just the pass? Well, the pass.
No, I'm saying just getting that data. Like, you're saying it's a lot of work. So
No, it's not a lot of work.
Oh,
No,
okay, okay.
it's the matter of how to present it, because that's a lot of data, and I've got a lot of. And currently, what we've done is just do that for each exam, just the overall general, and then we've had a list of all the school reports too to go
Yes.
in there and stuff. And it's a matter of validating to make sure, but it's not. Yeah, I mean that we just have to get the system down of we pull them every 90 days, and and then how to present them. So.
Like, I think for the law and ethics, we're right around the mid 70% for pass. So that's, and that's been pretty consistent throughout since we started administering the law and ethics exam. Also, I'm not concerned about that. I think some folks might think that that's excessively high, but I don't. Law and ethics is rote, so it should not be that big a deal. So, okay.
Does anyone from the audience want to address any of what we're discussing? Okay, any other comments from the board?
And I will continue the report on continuing education audits. So in 2016, we resumed a very an active CE audit program. Happy to report that in 2016, 305 licensees were audited, and of that particular number, 26% or 80 licensees failed the audit. And the top three reasons for failing the continuing education audit in 2016 were failure to complete the required law and ethics course, that's 6 units, or 6 hours, failure to complete the required number of CE units within that renewal period, and taking at CE from unapproved providers. So that was kind of a problem. During the last quarter of 16, we did not audit any licensees. Instead, what we did is the staff member used that time to reconcile the 2016 audits and complete the ones that were outstanding and prepare for 2017. So January 1st, 2017 rolled around. And we resumed our audits again. The chart that is in the operation report is actually incorrect. A correct one was provided to you here at the dais and at the back table. But the correction, for those who didn't get it corrected, the headers were flipped. So the number where in the operations report where it says number of pass, that should actually say number that failed. So that's the difference. So we actually, in the first quarter, we audited, oh my goodness. What did we audit? Where's that number? 72 individuals. And of that number, 12 have failed and 43 have passed. And we still had, at the time I prepared the report, we still had 17 still outstanding. We're still waiting. And the goal for 2017 is to complete 720 audits. So we're going to be really busy. And the reasons for this first quarter's, the first audit's failure, it remains consistent with what we saw in 16. They're not completing the law and ethics course. They're not getting the required number of CEUs, and they're taking CEUs from unapproved providers. Unfortunately, when they fail an audit, these individuals go to the enforcement unit and they're subsequently issued a citation and fine. So that's what's happening in the audit. And I think moving forward with the CE audits, I think we're going, in our website redesign, we're going to start trying to provide better information about where licensees can get audits or get CEUs.
I want to start reaching out to our approval agencies and definitely see if I can get a link from them to, that our licensees can click on and find CEUs through those links. I think the professional associations that we recognized, that are recognized as CE providers, I don't think our licensees have issues getting CE from those entities, but it's sort of the broader approval agencies where the issue is. Yes.
Sometimes I think, the early education, even reaching out to the school, to let those, the faculty knows that, it's important to really take care of your license by, these are the means. So, and also, in letting them know, there's an audit going on, and don't ever think that, you may not be chosen, since we have an example right here.
Yeah.
So, before, and she passed. First round. Right.
Yay.
So I just believe that, sometimes, with the assistance from the association, with the school, instead of just scaring them that, yes, you will have the cite and fines, but it's important to part of the taking care of, your obligation.
Right.
Of having a license.
I would agree. I have a couple of opportunities to present at some professional associations, and CE is one of the ones I think we're going to talk about specifically at the Cal LPCC conference. Kind of, the overarching thing is, okay, so things to avoid being in trouble with the board. CE is one of them. And we try to put it in our newsletter that comes out quarterly, reminding our licensees of their obligation to complete CEUs. I know that when we speak to the MFT consortiums on a quarterly basis, that's a routine part of our presentation. So, we're doing our best to get the word out there. So I think we'll just continue those efforts. Speaking of outreach activity, we were kind of busy. So in November, there were a few things. We attended several consortium meetings, a fall symposium for CAMPT. We actually had a booth there or a table so that the licensees and registrants could come up and actually speak with staff. That continues to be extremely well received. Christina reported earlier that the three of us, Renee, myself, and Christina, went to the ASWB annual conference in San Diego. December, we had more consortium meetings we did in January. And in February, just recently, staff from the MFT unit and our exam unit went down to the Orange County MFT Consortium Student Trainee Internship Fair. Again, highly well received. And what we're doing in some of these outreach activities where our licensing unit goes, we're now sending someone from the exam unit so that they can speak to both sides. We send them with a computer, so if there's any issues at that particular time, they can research it right there on site and get things resolved. And they can actually show folks how to renew online and the website and where to look for things. In a couple of weeks, our LPCC unit and our examination analyst are going to attend the American Counseling Association's conference in San Francisco. My understanding is Dr. Brew will be presenting there. And so we'll have a table and start participating in that. And I know in April we'll do the CalPIC, and we've got NASW Lobby Days coming up, so we'll report on that at the next meeting. So that's operationally what we've been doing. Any questions, comments? Okay. Personnel, overall, we've had some vacancies and some interviews. We had 5 internal promotions. So when you promote internally, that inherently means you have a vacancy. And we had 2 new hires to the BBS. So in the internal promotions, we promoted Caitlin Martin. She's now accepted a permanent position with the board. She was previously in a limited term position. Limited term means that it's only good for a specific period of time. So now she's permanently part of our team. We promoted Julie Ruprecht to the exam analyst. This is the individual that will be coordinating a lot of the workshops, processing SME invoices, and she's been well received so far. But that means Julie left a position in the licensing unit, so now we have to find a new licensing evaluator. Happy to do so. We've promoted Sam Hall. He was new to the board, been with us about a year, close to it, and he has taken a promotional position to be conducting criminal or subsequent arrest investigations. We welcomed the return of Gina Bayless back to the board as a manager in our examination unit. And we hired Raven Tramail as an office technician in the enforcement unit. Raven is new to the board. She did some enforcement work for the Department of Social Services, so she brought some good background and experience. We also promoted Sasha Addison. She moved from enforcement to the licensing unit. So we swap good people, we borrow, we move them around. And then we've promoted Amber Apodaca as well in the licensing unit. So we had one departure. Christina Hansens was a LCSW evaluator, and she accepted a promotional position in another department. So the sum total of all of those moving pieces means that we have 4 positions open. 2 of them are in enforcement, 1 is in examination, and 1 is in licensing. Interviews are ongoing. I know that in a couple of those positions, there have been selected candidates submitted up to personnel for approval to make final offers. So the hiring and, bringing new people on continues. So are there any questions about personnel? Okay, moving forward, the strategic plan update. What I did for you this time is I kind of color-coded in the plan the activities that have been completed. So if we look at the licensing goals, we have 2 ongoing remaining, and the ongoing things are just things we do routinely. We're evaluating processes, looking for improvements, how can we do things better. We still have 1 objective in process, but we've completed 5. For examinations, there were 3 objectives there. We've completed 2, and 1 is in process. So the 1 in process is the feedback that we get about the performance of our subject matter experts. When we look at enforcement, we have completed 4 of those objectives. We have 1 that's ongoing, and we have 1 that remains. This is the standards for report templates. And, we'll get that done here pretty quickly, definitely by the end of the fiscal year. In our legislation and regulation activity, we have 4 completed objectives, and 1 is in process. The exempt committee just started its work, so that's the one that's in process. For organizational effectiveness, we have completed 1, discussed another, which was to align the board committees with the strategic goal areas. We talked about that previously, and I think it was the pleasure of the board that we either revisit or, discuss it later at the next development of the strategic plan. We do have some remaining activities that are ongoing, which is just looking at internal processes, board recognition, training for our staff, so that's ongoing. In our outreach, these are again ongoing. Each of these objectives have been addressed, and I wouldn't call them completed because I think there's always opportunities to improve and expand our outreach. So with that, if you take a look at the strategic plan, most of our goals and objectives have been met. Hence, we'll be developing a new strategic plan during our October board meeting. We've contacted with Solid, and they know that we're on the calendar to do that. They will help us develop our strategic plan like they did previously. And shortly, the survey or environmental scan will be going out to staff, stakeholders, and I'll share that information with them, with everybody, and then we'll come back and use those results to develop our plan.
Christina?
So Kim, did you say it's October that we're going to start?
August, yeah, that's a 3-day board meeting. The first day of that board meeting is going to be all strategic plan.
Okay, sounds good.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on. We now have you're complete. Update on the review of the AMF TRB National Exam and the NBCC National Clinical Mental Health Counselor Exam. And that is Kim.
Okay. So at a few board meetings ago, initially, back in 2010, the board engaged the services Applied Measurement Services to evaluate and assess the national exam for MFTs. That exam is administered by the Association of Marriage and Family Therapy Regulatory Boards. Essentially, we wanted to see how the development of that exam was, and would it be reasonable to consider if that exam could be used here for licensure in California. So the results of AMS's evaluation was presented to the board in 2013. Yes, the results were that is a valid and legally defensible exam, but there were some challenges technically with that exam, and there was some confidentiality issues, and so the more specific nuts and bolts of the concerns about the technical challenges were presented to the board in a closed session. So globally, we can talk about what the concerns were at that particular time. It was a paper pencil exam. At the time, our board was using a computer-based administration. When we looked at the total population at the time, it was over 55,000 MFTs in the nation. California at the time had over 30,000. So you're trying to balance that and looking at whether it's appropriate to use that national exam, knowing that they were doing a paper pencil administration, or continue to do what we were doing, and that was developing our own examination. And looking at how our exam was being developed at that time and looking at how it was performing, the board at that time decided that there would be no changes in examination structure for the MFTs. So, yes.
I just wanted to ask, with the paper and pencil exam, isn't the scoring and the processing of those exams, if they were done with the national exam, be really delayed?
Absolutely. And if you were looking at the time of influxing, probably 5,000 to 6,000 individuals who wanted to be licensed, knowing that they could take that exam maybe twice in a year. I mean, that's a lot of exams adding to what they were already doing. So the volume, if you think about drinking water out of a fire hose, that's kind of what would have happened to AMF TRB at that time. So yes, that would have.
Yeah, unless they become automated, it doesn't sound like it would really be an advance for us.
Yeah, at that time, that was the consideration. Moving forward, though, what we've done is we've contacted AMF TRB. They are now on a computer-based administration, which is positive for us. And so when we discussed the issue of using a national exam came back before the board in 15-16, because at that time, now we've added a second national exam. So currently, our licensees for clinical counselors and social workers now take a national exam. So then the question at that time became, do we want to look at the national exam for MFTs again? So at that time, I had reported that they're doing a clinical or a computer administration of the exam. And so the direction of the board was, let's maybe evaluate that. And the stakeholders were interested in that as well. So following that meeting, myself and a couple of staff members met with Office of Professional Examination Services to kind of discuss evaluating the AMF TRB exam. And so we had that meeting in late November and then again late January of this year. And OPES confirmed that, yes, they can do that. They will evaluate the exam for us to see, and bring us those results. But they had asked that they wait until after the board has finished its current occupational analysis, which is scheduled in 2018. And for those that may not recall, an occupational analysis is done. That's the very beginning of developing your exam. And what that does, it surveys all of the licensees that are in practice at various levels and surveys the landscape of practice at that particular time. And then based on those responses, then you start developing your exam plan, your content areas. And then once you get the content areas identified, then you identify the tasks and the knowledge and the skills that are necessary. So, we will, OPES is committed to evaluating that exam, AMF TRB's exam in 2018. And that would, at the conclusion of our occupational analysis, and I know that AMF TRB is going through their occupational analysis now. So I think the timing will be good. So once they conclude their evaluation of the national exam, I'll bring that back to you, and we'll probably have OPES present the results.
Are there any other questions by the board before I open it to the public? Okay, for the record, if you'd please introduce yourself and speak into the microphone.
Sorry, Jill Epstein with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. So I'm just trying to understand the process here. So this occupational analysis is done, there's one being done by the BBS and also one being done by the board, their national exam. So that has to happen first before you can then, so are we starting this whole process, the evaluation you have to start over again because the
Yes.
last one was stale from
Yes.
2013?
Yes, yeah, because the last time it was done was 10, 11, 11, 12. Yeah, and then 13, they presented the results. But yeah, that's part of the process.
Okay.
So, yes.
So that's why it has to be 2018. We can't
Correct.
move it forward. And then, do you have any sense of where you see this going? Do you think that the occupational analyses will line up to make the national exam a possibility?
It really depends on what the board wants to do, honestly. We already know that the AMF TRB has a legally and viable exam. We already know that. It becomes a question of whether or not it's appropriate to use that for licensure in California. Just my own personal experience at conferences with different licensees and other executive officers, I can tell you that practice out in California, it's a bit different than it is in the Midwest and back east. And so I think the challenge in using a national exam is, can you capture enough of the flavor of California to make it viable for use in California? And if not, then, what do you do to supplement that? Is a law and ethics sufficient? Do you need to have another exam? Again, yeah, and then you need to balance that with the populations. California has the biggest population of MFTs across the nation, hands down. So, those are all things you got to take into consideration, because I think the overarching goal is to improve portability. Right now, California is one of 50 states that doesn't use that exam for licensure.
Oh, that. Okay.
Yes, so.
Very good. Thank you for that explanation.
Any other comments from the audience? Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay.
I just had a quick question, and I think it may be just a typo. The 35,000 LMFTs in California versus a total of 20,000?
You're right, it was 50, yeah, it's 55
Okay,
at the time. That is a typo.
Okay, thanks.
My apologies. Moving forward, MBCC's exam. Now, the board, there was some history with that. In 2010, we got the regulatory responsibility to license and regulate professional clinical counselors. So given that this would be a new mental health profession in California, the challenge then became, how do you administer an exam, develop an exam? And so the direction to board staff at that time was to evaluate the national exam for MBCC that they use, and they had several. We also used Applied Measurement Services at that time to evaluate that exam. And, they looked at it, there were some concerns with it. And through that ongoing and engaged process. Eventually, during a board meeting in 2011, the president of NBCC came out and presented the exam, what it would look like to the board members, and had a presentation that demonstrated to the board members at that time that they had resolved all of the concerns that AMS had identified. And so the direction at that point in 2011 to board staff was to engage in a contract with NBCC to offer this exam to LPCCs. And so that, since the inception of LPCCs, we have been using the NBCC exam, and specifically the National Clinical Mental Health Counselors Exam, because that was the one that had the more clinical content in it. So within our contract, it is provided that we can conduct a periodic assessment of the exam to determine if it continues to remain relevant to use here for licensure in California. So during our November and January meetings with OPES, we broached the subject of just conducting this assessment, because we've not evaluated this exam since we've started using it for licensure in 2011, 2012. So OPES agreed. It's perfectly appropriate, and so they are scheduling their evaluation for sometime in this year, and they want to do it after the occupational analysis for the clinical counselor survey. So once that evaluation is complete, again, we'll present the results to the board. So, and these two evaluations really go to our mandate to ensure that we are testing the competency of the individuals that are coming to be licensed here in California. And the mere fact that we delegate the administration to a national entity doesn't relieve us of the obligation to continue to evaluate that exam to make sure that it's still relevant to what we're doing here in California. So this is how we're going to fulfill that mandate.
Questions? Any comments from the audience? Okay. Up next is the customer satisfaction survey. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, so we will, it was either that or namaste, I'm not sure which. So it's 9:36, we'll come back at 46. To move on with the update on the survey, is Mr. Mason here?
I'll be doing the report. Fred.
Okay, so he is not, he's not here.
Yeah,
Okay,
not
he's
here.
busy. All right, so Mr. Steve.
There you go. Thank you. Survey's been a long time coming. It's about a year ago this time we had discussed the survey. At that point, we brought a survey to the board that was very comprehensive and tedious. So, and at that time, the board asked us to revise that and put the survey out. So we have a new survey which is very succinct. It is not as long as the last one, and it will be going out on social media to distribute it on the platforms there. We will also be putting it on everyone on the board will have it on their signature block. Question is whether people will know what the logo is. I'm hoping that when people see emails from us, they'll get curious as to what that monkey-looking thing is on the signature block and hit it. So, and the whole reason behind the survey is to really see, how we can improve customer service, and at the same time, hopefully see where we might be doing good in customer service. And as we move forward over the next few months, we're going to be kind of coaching the staff on when they have interactions with people. A lot of the times we have people want to leave comments, or who can I talk to, or of an experience that I had, whether it's bad or good. And so we're going to kind of coach people to, good or bad, direct people to this customer satisfaction survey, and hoping to get, not that it's not good results what I'm talking about, but like constructive results. That's why before, when we had the survey, it was really out there for people to complain, which is fine, but it really wasn't serving us a purpose. So we're hopefully, with the interaction with the staff trying to distribute it, with more people taking it, hopefully we'll get some good stuff to go off of and see where we can do the process improvements. So, any questions?
Christina, do you have a question?
I'm trying to construct my question, and I try not to talk too much. So, who will be your target target population? I mean, of course, if you ask them to fill it out, after the examination, I remember way back when, you have to fill out a survey before you can get your result.
No, there's that survey you're talking about. There is a survey with that PSI has. That's an exam survey. This has nothing to do. This is totally separate. This is the audit. What we're looking at to target is anybody who has interactions with the board or is looking for information about the board or what we do. So it can be anything from customers, from the public to licensees or registrants, anybody.
Okay.
So, and the way it's designed, I apologize for not really printing it out. But the first question is kind of just seeing where you're at. Are you a consumer? Are you, a licensee? And then from the consumer, it goes directly into the simple questions of how have you contacted the board? Were you happy? Kind of real basic questions. With the licensees and the registrants, it kind of goes into, it will section them out a little bit. If you're a licensee, what type of information were you looking for? Renewal? Were you looking for legal questions or statistics or something? And so we'll present this at the next board meeting, so you get a better idea of what we're looking at. So
That's good. Thanks.
Eddie?
So actually, that answered one of my questions, which is, it sounds like we're going to get a chance to look at it before it actually goes out at the next board meeting. Is that right?
Well, we are ready, moving forward to putting it out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then.
So what we can, so that was what the last board meeting was, design it and put it out there. What we can do, though, is at that first meeting, and when we review the questions, it's not going to be it's going to be a work in progress, I guess. So we can, if we see for some reason, we're going to look at it too, if there's questions aren't working, we're not getting responses or something like that, we can always revamp the survey, as it is. So
It's not chiseled in stone.
no, it's not chiseled in stone, and that's what I think. Also, what we're, at least I'm kind of looking at this too, is if we start getting results back, and we notice there's areas of concern, we might even do separate, targeted, surveys for certain aspects of that.
And then I know one more quick question. How are we? I don't think I understand how we're accessing our consumer base. How are we even identifying who to send that to?
So we can't really identify the consumer base. There's really what that for the consumer base. If it's a consumer, I'm hoping that if they visit our website, we have the customer satisfaction survey up there. If somebody calls into the board, and they are looking for something, and maybe we can ask them to, would you like to take a survey, or could you, to see if you've answered the, So it's really, we can't really publish it out there that big, as best as we can. Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. So the samples you got is basically anybody have some interaction with the board, right? Either they call us or they go to our website. So there's not like you send out something to all the licensee or a selected number of licensee to see their perception of us.
Well, we originally we're going to put it out. Putting it out there on Facebook, social media, that we have a survey out there. So we'll definitely get a lot back probably in the beginning. But then, it's really looking at. Yeah.
So there's no attempt for us to send randomly select 500 or whatever number of our licensees. So
No.
not the random sample. Okay, I just want to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing we're looking at too is I noticed there was one board, we came upon it when we were making the survey where they have it's actually, I don't really like these windows too much, but it looked pretty cool as a pop-up window. So if you spend enough time on our website, it'll actually pop up and ask to take a survey. So we're looking at that option too.
Utilize the assistance of the associations?
Well, yes, I think the intent of this survey is primarily to gather information about someone's experience with the board. So, and then using that information to better guide us where we might need to make some improvements. So, and part of what I think our vision is also provide a mechanism for those who have like an outstanding experience with a staff member, then they can send that to us via email. That's a nice thing to do as well. But so that's the intent. I think the survey you're talking about is sort of a landscape type, let's gather information and then use that information to craft something else. I think what we're looking for and was the intent of the previous survey and what the legislature looks at when we have to report is what is the consumer or someone's experience with the board. I can tell you for right now, one of the things is nobody answers their phones.
Yeah.
So that's that, and to that, we are in the midst of revising our phone system, and it should be implemented here in another, 45 days, Steve? 60? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the only reason I ask the question is just to answer some of the things you're saying. Don't be too discouraged if we got, because I really think, to me, it's also important for me to know how is the general perception of the people we serve out there, whether they have reaction, with us, in the immediate past or not. It's just like whether we are being perceived as a very efficient and good agency. So I think that kind of feedback is also important. But I know that's not your goal,
Right.
but that's okay.
Right, and there is a separate survey too that goes out at the close of an enforcement case. There's cards, they send those back, and Consumer Affairs tabulates that. And I'm just going to tell you, nobody ever gets a thank you card in enforcement because, you're usually disciplining a license, Yeah, thank you for taking my license. That felt good. So, although, we do have gotten occasional, thank you for your assistance in the process. It was informative, but primarily that kind of a survey just really sort of invites that negative feedback. I'm hoping with this survey that folks that have either a positive experience or a negative experience, and they're on the phone with one of our staff members, the staff member, can, if they have comments or concerns, oh, did you know that we have a survey? If you go to our website, click on it, you can provide more feedback, comments there. So I'm hoping to get a good balance, but again, the survey is voluntary, it's not mandated, so, you got to view the results with that lens.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion is in the future, just think about what I said. I think it's also important for us to get a sense of, like the 107 licensees, how they perceive us.
How they perceive us?
Yeah, so you can just do a random sampling, of 1,000 or whatever, get a statistician, send it out and see, what we get.
Right, okay. Yes, Karen?
Another source of consumer feedback, I think, would be the professional association magazines. Because if someone wanted to complain, or maybe someone wants to talk about what a good experience they had, that's another outlet for the consumer. And maybe they have a place to collect that information. Do you know anybody? Jill?
I don't know. I know that, and I can't speak for the associations, but I don't know how you guys would perceive that.
Well, maybe we could just put a link on their website that they could link over to ours, to that particular place on our website.
They could provide a link over to us if the people wanted to look to see.
Okay.
Because I think we're getting confused with what the survey's actually supposed to show, and that
it
is
has-
our internal workings here as a staff and a board, and how the consumer and the licensees perceive us and how good a job we're doing.
Right, but I just thought that might be another avenue for consumers to express that.
I can share with you that, since we have increased our outreach efforts, the feedback has been phenomenal. They like having us there, so that's why we've been really trying to target all the professional association conferences. Once we get there, they realize we are not evil BBS. Depending on the mood of the audience, I will open up my discussions about, here we are, evil BBS. I left the mask at home. But it's really kind of interesting, and I think Deborah and I experienced it a little bit when we attended the symposium for trans youth, when they introduced that, and you have, people from the BBS here in attendance. You could hear a pin drop. It was like, oh my God, what are they doing here? So I think the more that we get out, the staff goes out to those types of events, the more that the board members take advantage of events that might be in their area, neighborhood, to get out there and actually put a face with our organization. They realize we don't have six horns coming out of our head, that really we are not trying to, take away the license, that we really are here to balance, making sure that quality, competent individuals are providing those services and that consumers are protected. And in my conversation and my experience, once that message gets out there, it's a much better relationship and people are less afraid of us.
Back to address what Ms. Pines was saying, if maybe one of the organizations would just, my question is there an opportunity either on your website or in your correspondence that you send out to your licensees, an opportunity to just highlight that there is a customer survey and give the URL link if they're interested to come and back and see what's going on?
Right there, Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. I don't think that would be a problem. The only concern I have is that when we get phone calls, a lot of times people are so confused who we are. Like, we're not the BBS. You know what I mean? They don't really draw a line between the professional organization and BBS, and trying to ask us questions like, well, when am I going to know my results, or how long? We could tell them the general things by looking at the website, but they really think we're the ones who are processing everything. So I wouldn't want to confuse matters more. That's my only concern.
Okay.
Jill Epstein with Camp. I don't see a problem with us putting this in our newsletter to link to your customer service survey. We regularly will promote features on the BBS website or links, so that won't be a problem as long as I get that information and the deadline we send out a monthly e-newsletter, so that's probably the best hit.
Okay, then there'll just be
Whatever
a blue
month
line and they can click on it and
Absolutely.
boom, they go.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Dean Porter, California Association for LPCCs. I was already making a note to make a link to the BBS survey, so that we'd be glad to do that in our newsletter or on our website.
Okay, thank you, Dean.
Green for go. There
we go.
Heidi Holmblad from the California Association of School Psychologists. We do have a entire section of our website for LEPs, and we can easily put that link on there, so that's not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you. Good question. And a resolution. Okay, are you done, Steve? All right. Moving on. Do you want to be done, Steve?
You want more? I got more. Yeah, I can keep talking about surveys and.
I guess I should have asked that at the beginning.
Yeah, that was. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Policy and Advocacy Committee recommendation. This is going to be Roseanne. And just to give you a heads up, we will be needing a motion and a second after each consideration. Okay, Roseanne?
Okay, so we are working on proposing quite a few regulation changes related to our board's enforcement process. There's some provisions in our regulations related to enforcement that need some updating, and also our uniform standards and disciplinary guidelines need some updating as well. It's been a few years since we've done that. So the regulations about enforcement that we're proposing today, just ahead of time so we're clear, the section we're going to talk about right now, 26A, and then 26B, which is the uniform standards, which are being presented separately, they're all going to be run as one regulation proposal. We're just talking about them separately to keep things a little bit clearer for discussion purposes. So I'm going to start with the enforcement regulations related to unprofessional conduct and the board's ability to levy fines. There's several proposed minor changes to these sections that are in the board's regulations. Some of these proposed changes, we're talking about deleting some provisions in the regulation unprofessional conduct sections that are already in statute word for word. So we're just going to be deleting those. There's also some mentions in the unprofessional conduct sections of needing to provide the board copies of records. And based on advice from legal, the board needs certified copies of those records. So we're putting some language in there that those records need to be certified. We're also adding some language about failure to provide documentation regarding arrests and convictions. Currently, it's unprofessional conduct to fail to provide information about an arrest if the board requests it. We're also adding in some language about the need to provide information about a conviction if the board requests it. And then finally, there is a section that talks about the amount of fines that may be levied for various violations. One of those violations is confidentiality, and the fine is up to $5,000. And DCA Legal has just recommended that we put a reference to Civil Code. It begins with Section 56, the Confidentiality of Medical Information Act. We want to do a cross-reference to that section, just so that there's a kind of a source of where the authority for that is coming from for the confidentiality violation. And so at the February 3rd meeting, the Policy and Advocacy Committee discussed these proposals that you see here today and recommended that the board consider commencing the rulemaking process. So the language is before you, and we can open it up for discussion.
Okay. Members of the board have any questions? Anybody in the public have a question? Okay. Leah?
I would like to move to direct staff to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed language and to begin the rulemaking process.
There a second?
I'll second it.
Something.
Oh,
Withdraw your second.
withdraw my second. Okay, I withdraw.
And to delegate the authority to the executive officer to make such non-substantive changes and take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking file.
Precisely.
And now second.
Well said. Is there a second to that well-said motion?
Christina did it.
I second it.
Second.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, discussion? Christina?
Aye.
Samara Ashley.
Aye.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach.
Yes.
Deborah Brown.
Yes.
Betty Conley. Christina Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew.
Yes.
Karen Pines. Max Disposti.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, I'll move along to item 26B, and this is will be part of the same regulatory proposal if it's approved today. And this piece of the proposal has to do with the uniform standards related to substance abuse and disciplinary guidelines. This document is incorporated by reference into the California Code of Regulations, Section 1888. And so there are a couple of changes to Section 1888 that we need to make as well. There's a lot of really minor changes to this document and also some really significant ones. I'm going to touch on the significant ones and stop after each one for discussion.
Okay.
And then at the end, we can open it up. Does that work, Deborah?
That works.
Okay. So the first change for consideration today has to do with references in Section 1888 to the disciplinary guidelines. The Section 1888 refers to the disciplinary guidelines as listed in the Uniform Standards Related to Substance Abuse and Disciplinary Guidelines document. This isn't technically correct. Legal has pointed out that there's not an actual section in the document that's identified as disciplinary guidelines. It used to be that the document was only disciplinary guidelines before we added the Uniform Standards piece a few years back. So I think it's more accurate to name the references differently. There's a section in that document called penalty guidelines. It lists minimum and maximum penalties for every violation. And so it's probably more accurate to refer to that as the penalty guidelines as part of that document, and then refer to the uniform standards related to substance abuse when we're talking about just that particular section. Are there any comments about that change?
Any questions? Peter?
Actually, I have a question. Maybe I'm confused because we keep telling the public and say, we're not imposing penalty. It's just for the protection of the public. And here we have a penalty guideline. It's just, I'm questioning the terminology, whether we're consistent.
Question? Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I think the reason for the change was based on previous council's advice. Now that we have a new council, perhaps, I don't know. Spencer, do you want to weigh in? I mean, we would refer to them as disciplinary guidelines, but they're actually the consequences of what would happen if we found a licensee had violated those particular law sections. I mean, do you feel like there's any wordsmithing that needs to be done there?
I would recommend that they be referred to as the disciplinary guidelines and uniform standards related to substance abuse. I believe that is the title of the document.
That's the title of the document. The comment was more talking about
On page 84, we say penalty guidelines, and then there's a whole matrix listed which provides the code sections, what the category of the violation is, minimum penalty, maximum penalty. And if I understood Peter's comment, we try not to be punitive, and so he's wondering if the term penalty sort of supports that notation of being punitive, and perhaps maybe we should refer to it as, I don't know.
Whatever, because the way I understand it, there are different case laws, cited the judge saying that it's not for punitive purpose. So I don't know what else you call it other than consequences or whatever, but I think penalty would not hold up in court because it's inconsistent with previous case laws.
Roseanne?
I think that to get a good idea of what we're looking at doing, if you look at page 69, and it's kind of in the middle of Part A, and it sort of explains, so where it's talking about right after you see a sentence struck out that talks about the disciplinary guidelines applying to all disciplinary matters. That's not, the document as a whole is called Disciplinary Guidelines and Uniform Standards. There's a section in the document called Uniform Standards Related to Substance Abuse, and then there is a there is a Part 2 reference in the document to the penalty guidelines, which is that chart, and that applies to all disciplinary matters where we're talking about the uniform standards only applying to substance abuse. so the document as a whole is called disciplinary guidelines, but we were misreferencing the table that talks about penalties as being the disciplinary guidelines, and that was confusing. So I think that the terminology of using disciplinary there as the header of that section might be confusing.
Oh, sorry, Spencer.
I'm sorry, actually, my comment is not particularly germane to, what we're trying to do to change, but I'm just, since we're visiting this whole topic and then the term penalty guidelines kind of caught my eye. It's nothing, I don't think it's anything to do with, what we're proposing. And it's more like an afterthought when I look at this.
It definitely, the penalty section, that subsection 2 penalty guidelines, we could consider changing the name, but it probably would be confusing to call it disciplinary guidelines because the whole document is named Uniform Standards and Disciplinary Guidelines.
This is not consistent with the way most of the boards are doing it. What they do is, where it says deviation from the penalty guidelines, that information can go in the initial statement of reasons. And the disciplinary guidelines do provide that that they may be deviated from. That's contained in there. If they find in their sole discretion that it's necessary. So I don't know why Angelique, was it Angelique, or the former counsel recommended that this language go there, because it is initial statement of reasons language.
Okay.
Yeah, as well as where it says Part 1, uniform standards related to substance abuse applies to case of substance abuse, Part 2. Yeah, that would go in the initial statement of reasons. Yeah, so I don't understand why she recommended that language go here.
Maybe I have a question for Roseanne. Is there any time sensitive for this proposed change, or whether we can regroup and bring it up again next meeting?
Oh, Spencer says we can make the change right now.
Hi there. So I'm a little bit confused because I understand what we have been saying about the guidelines. In reality, what we have been discussing philosophically is the fact that this board, that for nature, doesn't act in a punitive way. That means that we're not going beyond our duty and responsibility to charge people for their misconduct, but there are guidelines that we ask people to go by, and we reinforce them. Otherwise, if I understood what Peter was saying, otherwise we'll be completely like we abstain from putting out their guidelines that they are going to be effective, and they're punitive in a way that they're asking people to do certain things. If they don't do certain things, they're not going to get their license back. So at a certain point, for my understanding, the conversation with our past counselor was about the nature of the way we're actually applying regulations. So we're not just because we see a situation, so for instance, at UI instances, we apply the guidelines, we don't go beyond that we're not trying to guess what the person's coming from and what their circumstances were. We're basing on facts of what we have, we apply those regulations. So I don't see the conflict, but again, I might be just underestimating that. So I just want to share that.
Thank you. I think Spencer may have our answer. So Spencer?
Oh, great.
I would recommend that where it says guidelines / disciplinary guidelines, and that's in parenthesis, strike that, as well as all of the new language that ends with evidentiary problems, period. And where it says deviation from and then disciplinary is stricken and penalty is added, I'd recommend that disciplinary remain and penalty be stricken. So that would read, in reaching a decision on disciplinary action under the Administrative Procedure Act, Government Code Section 11400 at SEC, The Board of Behavioral Sciences shall consider the uniform standards related to substance abuse and disciplinary guidelines, revise, and then to insert effective date. That can remain. And then, which are hereby incorporated by reference, period. Deviation from the disciplinary guidelines, including the standard terms of probation, is appropriate where the board in its sole discretion determines that the facts of the particular case warrant such a deviation. For example, the presence of mitigating or aggravating factors, the age of the case, evidentiary problems, period. And B is fine.
Okay, so Spencer, if I understand you correctly, basically we could go back to the old language, but we would change the effective date.
That's correct.
Perfect, okay.
Any discussion? Members of the public?
Just to be clear, we're going back to the old language except for paragraph B, which Spencer said was fine. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely, yes. It's less confusing and it's clear.
Do you have any more discussion on this one? No? Okay, is there a motion? I asked if there was public, no, I didn't get anything. Okay, is there a motion?
The motion would be to approve the proposed regulatory language as amended and direct staff to commence the rulemaking process and delegate the authority to the executive officer to make any non-substantive changes and take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking file. And someone just can say so moved.
I'll move that.
Okay, Max made a motion, second. Okay, Ms. Pines? Oh, I'm sorry, Samara. Next time. Any discussion? All right, Christina? No,
Do we need from the public comment on it? or-
I asked if the public wanted to comment.
Okay. Dr. Peter Chu?
Aye.
Samara Ashley?
Aye.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach?
Yes.
Deborah Brown?
Aye.
Betty Conley? Christina Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brew?
Yes.
Karen Pines? Max Disposti? Motion carries.
Okay, Roseanne, I believe we're on C.
That's actually me.
Oh, Christy.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Item number 2, so we've got a lot to go. Sorry. Thought you were out of the woods, but not quite. So item number 2 of the proposed changes, where we're talking about, again, this is also in section 1888. We're talking about violations involving abuse of drugs and or alcohol. And as written, this section it's in part B, it states that every violation that involves the use of drugs and alcohol must comply with the uniform standards related to substance abuse. At the time this was written, it was believed that this is what the statutes establishing the uniform standards law required. However, shortly after this regulation package was run, the Attorney General's office had issued a formal opinion, and that was AG Opinion Number 1302. Oh, it was page 61. And the opinion found that all boards must use the uniform standards in cases when they apply, and the boards may establish a regulation defining a substance abusing licensee for purposes of determining who is subject to the uniform standards. DCA Legal then concurred with that opinion that a board may use discretion in imposing the uniform standards based on whether the licensee is found to be a substance abusing licensee. So it's not just the use, it's if they're a substance abusing licensee. Based on this, legal had recommended that section 1888 be amended to clarify that if a violation involves the abuse of drugs and alcohol, then the violation is presumed to be a substance abuse violation. If the licensee does not rebut the presumption, then the uniform standards apply. So we've amended the language in 1888 Part B to talk about, instead of the use of drugs and alcohol, the abuse of drugs and alcohol. And then that change is also reflected on page 75 of your board packet, and it's page 4 of the uniform standards document. There's 2 page numbers on this because the document itself has its own page numbering. That first paragraph on page 75 of your packet, we've added some language there clarifying this to the uniform standards section as well.
Peter?
Please excuse my ignorance. How's abuse defined for the purpose of the guideline?
So that doesn't specifically define abuse. That's been kind of a point of debate throughout the whole committee that was formed to create the uniform standards. But the new language does state that the board can order a licensee or registrant to undergo either a psychological evaluation or a clinical diagnostic evaluation to determine whether there is a substance abuse problem.
Yeah, the reason why I asked is, as you professional know, they call AUD now, alcohol use disorder. I think the term abuse is kind of out. I mean, I'm just raising a question for the people in the field and see whether that would impact what we're doing here. I mean, in terms of definition.
I think we have a pretty thorough discussion at the P&A meeting. If you really pull the definitions, from different aspects, there are different, way to interpret it. So what I see for this particular change is the fact that, it changed from use to abuse, which actually narrowed down, to a group, a more definite group of people. And it's the board's decision to really define, what really abuse look like. So, so if you look at the purpose, it's really, instead of, everybody who use alcohol or drug that will subject to disciplinary guideline, it becomes a smaller population.
This is just a question about one piece of the new proposed language. About halfway down, conversely, if the licensee or registrant does not rebut the presumption, then the uniform standards related to substance abuse must be used without deviation. Just a question about that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have deviated from that in cases where the person has not rebutted the allegation, when in the opinion of the board, it didn't seem to be a substance abuse problem. So I'm just curious about that line.
I think it's there. Well, I think that you still have the discretion about because that's where the word abuse comes in. What this allows is basically the licensee or registrant to defend themselves and say, you've determined that I'm a substance abuser. I want to come back and say, I'm not because of X, Y, and Z. And then that allows the consideration for maybe some deviation. If the board determines somebody is abusing substances and the person says, yep, I am, and doesn't offer any reasons why there should be any exceptions made because of their circumstances, then it's saying that the standards would apply.
And where we're going to find this is when we, because whenever we get an arrest notification, part of our process, in addition to getting all the, police reports, court documents, et cetera, the licensee is afforded the opportunity to provide a description of that event and the circumstances, and then what you've done since that point in time to ensure that doesn't ever happen again. And that's where we could hear or see, we use that now as sort of to rebut the whole conviction. Just the fact that you have a conviction for a high BAC doesn't necessarily mean you are a substance abusing licensee. Perhaps you were just at a wedding, you overindulged, or perhaps some of those other things have occurred where this really is just sort of a one-time unfortunate situation. And so we've been doing that all along.
I understand that we have, and that's exactly my point. Is this going to back us into a corner?
No,
Okay.
no, because at the end of the day, the way that this is worded, the board still retains the discretion to determine, the appropriate penalties, if it were. If removing one of those specific penalties, you're still achieving consumer protection.
So I think what we're doing here is really almost codifying what we've been doing. I don't think it's going to change how our approach. And if Spencer, if my understanding of this is incorrect, then I would like to revisit wordsmithing it so that we still retain the discretion.
With respect to uniform standards, if a person has been determined to be a substance abusing licensee, you can't deviate from the standards.
Right.
That's the way the law reads.
Right, and so in a substance abusing licensee, if I'm getting an explanation about the fourth arrest involving those substances, and the person in his confession or her confession or statement to the board says, yes, and I have had a problem with alcohol and/or drugs for the last 10 years, and now I'm back in rehab, that kind of thing, that would be one where we would want to apply the standards.
Absolutely.
The ones that you don't want to apply the standards are, is, my best friend got married and we just overindulged, and I made the really unfortunate decision to get in a car and drive. I mean, to me, that's not necessarily a substance abusing individual, and it gives us a little more discretion as
Absolutely.
opposed to the confession that I have been an alcoholic all my life. So I still think the way this word is worded, it codifies what we've been doing.
It includes what the law requires.
Right.
What it says.
I just have a question for Roseanne. Just for my personal clarification, I'm assuming obviously the reinforcement of the term abuse, it goes only for, it doesn't apply to licensee they're under probation, right? Because in that case, any use of alcohol based on our guidelines will be disqualifying the individual for, okay.
Right.
Just to make sure, for clarity for myself.
Any other discussion or questions of the board? Okay.
Hi, Jill Epstein with CAMFT. I just want to echo and appreciate you for bringing up the concern about how this would impact practitioners. And we did discuss this at the policy and advocacy meeting. CAMFT was concerned about what is a substance abuse or substance abusing person. And I was very satisfied with Kim's response that there are multiple factors that are taken into consideration, like the example that Kim just gave, patterns and factors. So I appreciate that the board is really looking to identify those who are abusing and considering other factors. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Any other members of the public like to address the board? Roseanne, do you have anything further?
No further comments on that item.
Pardon?
On that item, are we gonna,
Yes. I mean, I'm just asking if she's finished.
No, because once you go through all the changes to the disciplinary guidelines.
You
and
want to
uniform
keep
standards,
going and then we'll
and then
do
they'll
the
just
other one.
approve,
Okay.
they'll approve it as amended.
Okay, the next item that I'm going to discuss is item number 7. And that is a proposal to add to the penalty guidelines, which is that grid that you see starting on page 85 of the board packet. It's page 14 of the Uniform Standards and Disciplinary Guidelines. So adding to the penalty guidelines a guideline for engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with a patient under age 18. SB 1172 in 2012 made it unprofessional conduct to engage in any type of sexual orientation change efforts with a patient under the age of 18. This violation, when that came into law, we were in the process of running regulations for this section already, so that violation is not included in the penalty guidelines yet as having a minimum and maximum recommended penalty. So what we did is we proposed adding minimum and maximum penalties for this item. Staff looked at the minimum and maximum penalties for several violations and chose to use the same minimum and maximum penalties used for the unprofessional conduct violation that's titled intentionally or recklessly causing physical or emotional harm to a client. That item can be seen on page 19 of the guidelines. It's page 90 of the packet. And then also this particular item that we're discussing, the penalty guidelines for engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with a minor, can be found on page 97 of your packet, page 26 of the actual document. So board might want to just take a look at the penalties that were chosen and discuss if they find them appropriate.
Any discussion from the board?
I have a question for Roseanne. Did the committee also consider, and I don't know how it's applicable to the law, because also that includes gender identity, not just sexual orientation, in terms for practitioners that are trying to force that into the minor specifically. So I wonder if that can be part of the language, or if that will steer away from what we're trying to do.
Okay, so for the purposes of that particular section, the sexual orientation change efforts, this is directly related to the law that was enacted by Senator Lieu not enacted, proposed by Senator Lieu, eventually signed by the governor. So in terms of gender identity, we have not had a law come forth about that. So
Okay, that's what I was.
yeah, if that were to come to fruition down the road, then yes, we would include that.
Yeah, and I just looked up the two sections that were added to statute, and it just is talking about sexual orientation change efforts. So yeah, we would have to add something else in the law for that.
Thank you.
Any other board member comments? Anyone from the public? Comments? Okay, going to move on.
All right, moving on to item number 8. These are some additional additions to the penalty guidelines. A few years back, DCA asked all of its boards to add some unprofessional conduct provisions to its law based on an effort that was called the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. And the board, or the department, basically asked for boards to tighten up some of the unprofessional conduct provisions related to consumer protection that it already had authority to do. So the provisions pertain to things like board investigations, and in some of the violations, there's 5 of them. They include things like failing to provide records or arrest documentation, or failure to cooperate in a board investigation. So this effort made all of these provisions unprofessional conduct. And they can be found on page 27 of the document. It's page 98 of your board packet. And so we've added some minimum and maximum penalties for each of these 5 items. Staff looked at the minimum and maximum penalties that were being used for other similar violations, and found that perhaps the violations of general unprofessional conduct and violations of a chapter or regulation by licensees or registrants could be used as a guide, because they're similar in scope they're similar scope violations. So again, the board might want to discuss whether it believes the penalties that have been chosen are appropriate.
Questions from the board? Questions from the public? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to item 9. Model disciplinary orders. So the document, the Uniform Standards Disciplinary Guidelines document, has a section, it's called Part 3, Model Disciplinary Orders. And when we were talking at the Policy and Advocacy Committee about the various types of disciplinary orders, it came up that sometimes if there's a violation it's not severe enough to warrant probation, it doesn't compromise public protection, that the board might issue a public reprimand. And so somebody asked if it would be possible to add some language stating that the board had the option to add a public reprimand as a penalty if it did not believe that the others were appropriate. that are listed in this document. So we took a look at the language and consulted with legal, and we thought that it would be appropriate to place that on it's page 100, it's page 29 of the actual document. And it's just a sentence that basically states that if a violation does not compromise consumer protection, not severe enough to warrant probation, then the board may choose to issue a public reprimand, and then it cites the authority, which is Business and Professions Code, Section 495.
Any questions?
What that looks like, the public reprimand, in terms of,
Okay, so it's for cases that have been referred to the Attorney General's office. So, and we've determined that perhaps it doesn't need to be on probation. So we would issue a letter that would be available to the public that basically says we've confirmed that a violation of law occurred, but essentially no further action would be taken. So in terms of what we have existing in our disciplinary process now, we can either issue a citation and fine, or we formally discipline them with probation. This is kind of in between. It's a little higher level of discipline than a citation and fine, but not as severe is a bad word, but that's the only word I can think of right now, as putting one on probation.
so, no, I understand that, and mostly, I thank you, who has access to that information, and where it's going to be
The public, it would be attached to their licensed
website.
record. Right,
Perfect.
correct. So,
That was my question.
here's a classic example, perhaps might be one of those unsolicited letters to the court. Okay, so the action is a little more egregious than what would be appropriate to issue a citation and fine, but really doesn't rise to the level to put somebody on formal discipline, but yet we need to take some type of appropriate action. A public letter of reprimand could be just that type of action that would be suitable for something like that.
Thank you, Kim.
Spencer would like to just clarify maybe and answer your question.
Maybe.
Maybe, oh yeah, maybe.
I'm sure it will.
A citation is an enforcement tool and is not regarded as discipline. And letter of reprimand is the lowest level of discipline, which will stay on the board's website. A citation does not, after a certain period of time.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions? Christine?
Yeah, so just for clarification of the implication of this, so if you were applying for a license in another state and they wanted to know about any disciplinary action, so you wouldn't have to report a citation, but you would have to report a letter of reprimand, is that?
That's correct.
Okay, just curious, okay.
Question. Christina?
Just quick clarification for Spencer. So you said will stay on the website. Now, how long will they stay on the website? The letter of reprimand, the reprimand?
In perpetuity.
Yeah.
That's what the law requires. All discipline.
So now, how about those on probation? So, if they were put on 5 years probation, they completed a probation, and then will those documentation be cleared?
No, it stays on the
Oh, it
website.
still stays, so it will, okay, so it's consistent with all the other disciplinary action? Okay, thank
Correct.
you.
The only thing that comes off is a citation and fine, and it comes off after 5 years, and it only goes on the website if it exceeds $1,500.
Any other questions? Members of the public? Okay, Roseanne?
Okay, the next item that I want to discuss is item number 12, and that has to do with the optional term and condition of probation that the board sometimes uses, and that is supervised practice. Currently, if a probationer is required to have supervised practice, the supervisor must be currently licensed in the probation or same field, but there are no other qualifications specified for the supervisor. An amendment has been made to state that the supervisor must meet the same requirements as supervisors of registrants who are gaining supervised experience as defined in statute. And so that would be supervisors of registrants. They have to do things like have been licensed for at least 2 years, been practicing for at least 2 out of the past 5 years, or supervising. They have to take, well, depending on the license type right now, they have to take either a one-time 15-hour course or 6-hour course, I think, every 2 years. And we're in the process of running some law and regulation changes that would require some continuing education related to supervisors that's a little bit more uniform across the license types. So that's one of the changes under supervised practice. The other change being proposed under supervised practice is that if a probationer under supervision learns that his or her supervisor is no longer going to be available to supervise the supervisee, then the probationer has currently they have 15 days to report this information to the board. The enforcement unit has requested to cut this down to 3 days in order to ensure that that the board knows in a timely manner that somebody is losing their supervisor.
Any discussion? Any questions from the board?
Is it a 3 days something that can actually occur? I mean, is it enough time?
3 days. It's 3 business days, so that should be enough time. It would be a phone call or putting a letter in the mail.
You have a follow-up question? No?
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Okay, member of the public.
Hi, Jill Epstein with CAMFT. I'm going to ask you to consider whether or not you really need to have these additional qualifications specified for a supervisor in this instance. What we talked about was that qualifications for a supervisor who's overseeing someone gaining hours of experience, obviously that is a different animal than a supervisor who's appointed to oversee a BBS licensee in a scenario where they're under some discipline or the scenario that it is. So we believe that the way the language should not be amended, that it should stay open as to what that supervisor's qualifications are, given that it's going to be case-by-case scenario, and what one person who's, it depends on what the supervisor's role is in that case, and the different levels of experience and so forth. We just think supervising a licensee is a different animal than supervising someone gaining experience.
Leah?
I do agree that it is different, but in any supervisory role, there is vicarious liability that the supervisor should be trained to understand. They should know that supervision should include not just looking at clinical skills, but case notes and countertransference issues, the whole process. So while the purpose is quite different, the skills to me seem to be the same. And I'm inclined to want to keep those. And you wouldn't want somebody with less than 2 years' experience as a licensee supervising another person.
Can I respond?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what I think, again, it kind of goes back to the idea of discretion, that for you to have the discretion, not to say somebody shouldn't have 2 years or whatever it is that you decide, but instead of proscribing that they have to have met these certain qualifications that are specified in this amendment, I would say that the way you're doing it now is adequate in the sense that you're evaluating case by case and what the qualifications are needed for that supervisor to oversee the licensee in their challenging situation.
So is it perceived to be difficult to find an appropriate supervisor if we put those requirements in? Like, what would be the negative of it?
It could limit the pool of people that you're going to have to select from to appoint. And again, given that case by case, there might be a fabulous licensee to serve as a supervisor in a certain scenario that doesn't have the BBS requirements for supervision under these amendment.
Just the 2 years in the course.
And the courses, right, and the courses.
Nina?
I'm also wondering now, the board doesn't approve individually, which license, which supervisor will be assigned to, to the probationer.
Yes, we
So
do.
for the-
I'm sorry, we do.
No, the board means the board member here. What I'm referring to is really the staff needs some guidelines, to approve them. So, so with, the more the specification, then the staff will actually be able to follow those instead of having that delegate the authority to the staff to make that decision.
if I'm hearing correctly, some of the concern is because of the new requirements for supervisors, the 2 years, the coursework, et cetera, ongoing CE could limit the pool of supervisors available to probationers. In part, I really think that's probably a valid argument, just from my perspective. I can see value in putting a time frame on which that supervisor could or should be licensed, and maybe removing the part that they have to comply with the coursework to be a supervisor and et cetera. But I'm not a practitioner. And I can tell you that even with the limited number of individuals that we have on probation now, sometimes obtaining just a supervisor under the current structure can be a challenge, especially in those rural areas. So I'm open both ways. It's whatever the board.
So, in support of your argument, the staff doesn't understand who would be qualified. They have no idea how to measure that unless you have a licensee involved in that process. So I just think it's one layer of protection. And the second piece is I can appreciate the difficulty, but you're allowing them to go outside of their field if they need to, so that an LPC could get an MFT or a psychologist for that matter. And the reason you have difficulty is because nobody wants that liability who's a supervisor. Somebody who doesn't understand that vicarious liability may take it on and not fully understand what supervision even means, how to do it, and the trouble they could get into if they don't do it well because of their ignorance from not being trained. I appreciate that it is harder, but with the video conferencing and going outside of your profession, it just feels like better protection for the supervisor, and then ultimately for the clients, right? Because the consumers could get hurt if the supervision isn't done adequately.
Christina and then Karen?
So when I'm looking at the nature of supervision, supervised practice, actually, in my view, it's, a little bit more challenging, because of the disciplinary action. So, so if you put a license, if you put a supervisor who is less qualified, to even provide the clinical supervision, I don't know how you can do the job. And for two, if I were the clinical supervisor, if I were the supervisor for the supervised practice, and I don't have I don't meet the minimum qualification, I would be very worried that whether the BBS will come after me, because I'm practicing quote to quote, out of, even the different level of the supervision. So I think that clarifying it's better and making, the standard, equivalent to, to the clinical supervisor, it avoids more trouble. I hear what Jill say, but with the unclarity, you probably create more worry from the licensee's point of view, and not willing to, to step in, to do the job.